You're thinking about someone you haven't seen for years. A few seconds later, they appear on your screen with an unexpected message or phone call. You're surprised. Maybe you comment to someone that it was a coincidence. But internally, something seems different. It seems more than chance. This kind of experience is common. According to a survey published by the American Psychological Association, around 62% of people say they have experienced coincidences so specific that they question whether they were really random. Despite this, most of these experiences are dismissed as luck or a figment of the imagination. It's what we've been taught to do, but this type of event has a name. Psychologist Carl Jung called it synchronicity, when two or more events with no apparent causal relationship align in a way that is meaningful to those who experience them. Jung came to this conclusion after a curious situation with a patient who dreamt of a golden beetle. During the session, a similar insect knocked on the office window at the exact moment the dream was being told. For him, this was not a coincidence, but a sign of something deeper going on behind visible reality. The question is, if these events are not mere coincidences, what are they? And more importantly, why do they happen? Many of these episodes are ignored because we have been conditioned to believe that reality is mechanical, logical, and predictable. Anything that deviates from this is usually dismissed as an error of perception. From an early age, we learn to trust only what can be measured, repeated, and proven. Intuition, a sense of meaning, unlikely alignments, all this has been labeled irrelevant. But what if this way of seeing the world is incomplete? What if there is an intelligent structure behind what we call chance, a kind of symbolic language that reality uses to direct us, answer our intentions, and guide our decisions? This video starts from this hypothesis. Over the next few topics, we'll explore what synchronicities are, why they tend to intensify when we start to consciously perceive them, and above all, how to interpret and apply them to make decisions that are more in line with what you really want. Reality may be trying to communicate with you. The question is not whether the signs are there, but whether you are paying attention. This could be the turning point between going on autopilot or learning to interact with a greater intelligence that has always been there, but which you are now ready to perceive. For a long time, we believed that life was made up of disconnected events. The prevailing idea was that everything happened by chance, following purely physical laws in a universe indifferent to human existence. But this concept is being questioned, not only by spiritualists or philosophers, but also by researchers into the mind, consciousness, and even physics. One of the first to propose a different view was the Swiss psychiatrist Carl Gustav Jung. In 1952, together with physicist Wolfgang Pauli, a Nobel Prize winner, he published a study entitled The Nature of the Psyche and the Problem of Synchronicity. In it, Jung describes synchronicities as meaningful coincidences that don't have a cause and effect relationship, but which carry deep meaning for those who experience them. In other words, they are not simple coincidences. They are symbolic communications of reality itself. This proposal arose from his clinical experience. Jung noticed that in moments of emotional crisis or personal transformation, his patients often reported external events that reflected exactly what they were feeling or thinking, even without a logical explanation. A classic example was the case of the golden scarab, which we have already mentioned. But Jung observed this pattern many times: dreams that came true, thoughts that coincided with events, signs that seemed to guide important decisions. Since then, this concept has continued to be explored, even outside of psychology. Recent research has begun to validate human experience as a legitimate source of data. In 2016, a study conducted by the University of Edinburgh analyzed more than 2,000 people's accounts of significant coincidences. The result was clear. A large proportion of participants reported not only recognizing unusual patterns, but also feeling that these events had a specific purpose in their lives. Traditional science often attributes these episodes to what is known as confirmation bias. According to this explanation, our mind is simply selecting information that confirms what we already believe. However, this approach fails to answer an essential point. Why do these coincidences occur precisely at moments of greatest emotional need or critical decision? Many of these experiences involve events with a highly specific time and context, which generate not only surprise, but also personal transformation. And this is what makes synchronicities different from simple coincidences. They carry a sense of purpose, as if life were trying to communicate something that is not yet visible, but is already manifesting itself in symbolic form. In addition to psychology, some areas of theoretical physics have also begun to explore the possibility that everything is connected by subtle layers of information. Quantum physics, for example, brought the concept of non-locality, the idea that distant particles can influence each other instantaneously without any kind of traditional physical connection. Although this occurs at the subatomic level, this discovery has opened up space for us to reflect. Could it be that the reality we perceive also operates through invisible patterns, beyond linear causality? If we think of nature as an integrated system where everything is organized in cycles, rhythms, and repetitions, it wouldn't be strange to imagine that our own experience of life is immersed in a similar structure. The constant presence of repeated numbers, improbable encounters, recurring symbols, and synchronized events may indeed represent a language, not verbal, but symbolic, used by reality itself to attract our attention. Therefore, synchronicities are not just loose messages in chaos. They arise when there is an alignment between what we feel internally and what happens externally. When this happens, reality stops being random and begins to appear responsive. And when this perception becomes constant, we stop feeling like victims of events and begin to see that we are actively participating in the construction of our own trajectory. Perhaps what we call signs are just the way the universe responds when we finally start to pay attention. From an early age, we learn to follow a model of reality based on logic, predictability, and control. This model is based on the idea that the world works like a machine. Every cause produces an effect, and everything can be understood through reason. This way of thinking didn't come about by chance. It was built up over the centuries, especially after the scientific revolution in the 17th century, when figures such as René Descartes and Isaac Newton helped establish a mechanistic view of the universe. From then on, what couldn't be measured or explained by formulas came to be considered irrelevant or false. The problem is that throughout this process, many aspects of human experience were left aside. Emotions, intuition, subtle perception, synchronicity, all of these were labeled as too subjective to be taken seriously. And this idea was reinforced by central institutions in our society: schools, universities, companies, governments. Education, in particular, has played a decisive role in this conditioning. Instead of teaching children to trust their inner senses, the focus was always on memorizing facts, repeating patterns, and obeying authorities. This form of teaching, still dominant in much of the world, shapes our thinking from our earliest years. It trains us to look outside ourselves for answers and to believe that only what can be proven by others is real. Gradually, we learn to ignore internal messages, those unexplained sensations, that intuition that insists on pointing us in a different direction, or that sudden connection we feel in certain encounters. This process doesn't happen consciously. It's subtle, but effective. Every time a child says they had a feeling and is corrected with a "that's just in your head," they learn not to trust their own perception. Over time, this becomes a pattern. Distrust everything that comes from within and accept only what comes from outside. Statistics, authoritative opinions, established norms. However, intuition doesn't disappear. It continues to operate in the background, often trying to warn, guide, or protect us. Modern science is even beginning to validate the role of intuition as a legitimate form of mental processing. Research from New York University, published in 2018, showed that intuitive decisions can be more effective in complex contexts than those based solely on rational analysis. This is because intuition uses data stored in the subconscious, accessed quickly and without conscious effort. In addition, neuroscientists have identified that the heart and gut have independent neural networks capable of processing information and even influencing the brain. This system is known as the intelligence trilogy: brain, heart, and gut working together. This reinforces the idea that our ability to perceive goes beyond the logical mind. When we feel that something doesn't feel right, or have a strong feeling, there may be a real biological basis for that feeling. Even so, the system we live in continues to prioritize logic and external proof. This creates an internal conflict. On the one hand, there is the mind trained to seek validation in data. On the other, there is a quieter but deeply connected part that perceives what reason cannot reach. It is in this space that synchronicities appear, like bridges between what we feel and what is happening in the world around us. Breaking with this conditioning takes practice and courage. We need to relearn how to listen to what has always been there, but has been drowned out. Intuition is not baseless mysticism. It is refined sensitivity, a type of intelligence that has been marginalized for centuries. And when we start to integrate this perception into the way we live, something changes. The signs become clearer, decisions become aligned with something bigger, and the feeling of disconnection gives way to a new way of living, more whole, more connected, and more aware. Spirituality has always been part of the human experience. For thousands of years, it has been an essential tool for interpreting the world, guiding decisions, and giving meaning to existence. From ancient indigenous traditions to the philosophical schools of the East, human beings have never been limited to matter alone. There was a recognition that there is something beyond the physical, something invisible that influences reality. But with the advance of Western science, especially from the 18th century onwards, this perspective began to be progressively discredited. Modern science emerged as a response to the religious dogmatism that dominated medieval Europe. Philosophers like Francis Bacon and scientists like Isaac Newton proposed a method based on observation, experimentation, and proof. This revolution was essential for the technological and scientific development we know today. However, along with this new approach also came an extremely materialistic view of reality. The idea that everything that exists can be reduced to matter and physical laws. This way of thinking excluded by default anything that could not be measured, quantified, or tested in a laboratory. Over time, this attitude crystallized into a kind of scientism, not science as a method of investigation, but as a closed belief system. Everything that didn't fit into this paradigm came to be considered superstition, illusion, or pseudoscience. Spirituality, which for centuries had been seen as a legitimate path of knowledge, became the target of criticism, mistrust, and, in many cases, public ridicule. This repression of the spiritual dimension has not only taken place in discourse, but also in institutions. In universities, research involving topics such as expanded consciousness, near-death experiences, or psychic phenomena is often marginalized. Funding is denied, articles are rejected from traditional scientific journals, and researchers who dedicate themselves to these areas end up being excluded from the academic community. As a result, science has moved away from one of the most fundamental questions of existence: what are we beyond matter? Nevertheless, even in the face of institutional resistance, many scientists have tried to keep alive this quest for a broader understanding of reality. One example is physicist David Bohm, who worked alongside Albert Einstein and proposed the existence of an implicit order in the universe, a hidden, deeper reality of which everything we see is just a projection. Another important name is neurosurgeon Ibn Alexander, who, after a near-death experience, wrote about how consciousness can exist independently of the brain, generating intense debate in the scientific community. In recent years, this debate has taken on new contours with advances in quantum physics. Phenomena such as particle-wave duality, quantum entanglement, and the role of the observer show that reality is much more complex and interconnected than previously thought. Many of these concepts dialogue directly with ancient spiritual ideas, such as the interdependence of everything that exists and the influence of mind over matter. The repression of spirituality by modern science is not just an erasure of ancient ideas, but a deep cut in the way we understand the world. By denying the subjective, symbolic, and energetic dimension of existence, we lose an essential part of our humanity. Science has a lot to offer, but when it closes its doors to the invisible, it limits not only its reach, but also our potential for transformation. The good news is that this divide is beginning to dissolve. More and more people, inside and outside academia, are seeking an integrated vision of reality, where science and spirituality are not excluded but complement each other. And in this reunion between reason and intuition, between data and inner experience, synchronicities are once again taking their place as bridges between the visible and the invisible, between the rational and the symbolic, between the world we measure and what we feel. For a long time, consciousness was treated solely as a product of brain activity, something that arises as a result of electrical impulses and chemical reactions. According to this traditional view, the brain is like a processor and the mind is a byproduct with no autonomy. But this explanation, although useful in certain respects, fails to respond to a series of phenomena that escape the logic of classical neuroscience. One of the greatest challenges facing science today, in fact, is precisely the so-called hard problem of consciousness. How does subjective experience, thoughts, feelings, perceptions emerge from raw matter? In recent years, this debate has taken on new dimensions. Several researchers have come to consider that consciousness is not a side effect of the brain, but a fundamental force of reality, perhaps even more primary than matter itself. This perspective has been explored by physicists, philosophers, and scholars of modern spirituality, who defend the idea that we are all immersed in a field of consciousness, and that our thoughts and emotions interact with this field constantly. This theory is not just conceptual, it is supported by some of the best-known experiments in quantum physics. One of them is the double-slit experiment, first carried out in 1801, but revised with new technologies in the 20th century. What this test revealed is that simple observation alters the behavior of subatomic particles. In other words, the observer's consciousness directly influences what happens in the physical world. This contradicts the idea that reality is completely objective and independent of who observes it. Another concept that reinforces this interconnectedness is quantum entanglement, the notion that two particles that have interacted remain connected, even if they are separated by great distances. When one is altered, the other responds instantly. This suggests that there is an invisible link between all parts of the universe, which raises the hypothesis that we are all participating in a unified energy network, even if our senses cannot perceive it. In addition to physics, studies in the field of energetic biology and integrative medicine also point to subtle connections between mind, body, and environment. Institutions such as the HeartMath Institute in the United States have been investigating for decades how emotional states affect the electromagnetic field around the human body. Using heart sensors, it has been discovered that emotions such as gratitude, compassion, and love generate patterns of coherence that impact not only our internal functioning, but also the way we connect with other people and even the environment. All this suggests that there is a silent language made up of frequencies, vibrations, and intentions, which connects all aspects of existence. Consciousness, in this context, functions as a sender and receiver of signals, capable of influencing and being influenced by energetic patterns. Thus, our thoughts are not just isolated mental activities, they act as vibrational commands, issued to this larger field that surrounds us. This view has an important consequence. If everything is interconnected, then nothing we think or feel is irrelevant. Synchronicities, for example, can be interpreted as responses from this conscious network to our internal vibration. When we enter states of greater presence, clarity, or intention, it seems that reality responds with events that reflect this alignment, as if we were tuning into a specific frequency and attracting corresponding experiences to it. This new understanding of reality profoundly transforms our relationship with the world. Instead of seeing ourselves as isolated individuals in an indifferent universe, we come to realize that we are active participants in a larger plot, where everything communicates on subtle levels. And perhaps by recognizing this, we can use this understanding not only to interpret the signals we receive, but also to generate real changes in our lives, with more awareness, more purpose, and more connection with everything around us. Much of what we experience on a daily basis is influenced by processes that don't occur on the surface of the conscious mind. While we believe we are in control of our decisions, actions, and thoughts, it is the subconscious that shapes most of our reality. According to research by the Cognitive Neuroscience Society, more than 90% of mental activity takes place automatically and outside of conscious awareness. This means that while the rational mind is analyzing, the subconscious is already making decisions, identifying patterns, and directing behavior. But what does this have to do with synchronicities or the creation of reality? Everything. The subconscious not only stores memories and beliefs, it also acts as a filter that selects what we perceive. What we focus on repeatedly, whether consciously or not, begins to shape the way reality presents itself to us. This mechanism is strongly influenced by a brain system known as the reticular activating system, RAS. This system works like a triage. It decides, based on our internal beliefs and intentions, which information is relevant and worth paying attention to. That's why, when someone starts paying attention to numerical patterns, for example, like 1111, or starts looking for signs from the universe, these elements start repeating themselves more often. It's not necessarily that these events are happening more than before, but rather that the subconscious is more sensitive to recognizing them and connecting them to something meaningful. But there is an even more subtle component to this equation: vibrational frequency. According to the principles of esoteric traditions and modern studies in energy physics, everything in the universe vibrates at a certain frequency, including our thoughts and feelings. Emotions such as fear, anger, and insecurity have denser frequencies, while states such as joy, compassion, and gratitude generate higher vibrations. This isn't just a spiritual metaphor. It's a finding studied by centers such as the Institute of Heart Math, which have already demonstrated using biofeedback equipment that different emotions affect the electromagnetic field emitted by the human body. The relationship between emotional frequency and perceived reality is clear. What you feel most strongly tends to be what you attract to your experience. If the subconscious is immersed in limiting beliefs and negative emotions, it filters reality in a way that reinforces these patterns. On the other hand, when the mind is conditioned by positive thoughts and a high vibrational frequency, it begins to attract events that resonate with this internal state. It is at this point that synchronicities become more evident. When someone is in a state of emotional coherence, with clear intentions and focused energy, reality seems to reorganize itself to offer answers, paths, and encounters that facilitate progress. These moments are not coincidences. They are manifestations aligned with what is happening internally. The subconscious therefore acts as a silent encoder. It translates our emotional vibration into external experiences. It's as if reality were a mirror that reflects not what we superficially desire, but what we really believe, feel, and repeat at deep levels. Understanding this radically changes the way we position ourselves in the world. Instead of waiting for reality to change in order to feel better, we begin to realize that change begins within, by reprogramming the subconscious and raising our vibration. Creating reality, then, is not an act of force, but of alignment. When thought, emotion, and intention vibrate in harmony, life begins to respond with greater fluidity, clarity, and purpose. Throughout this video, you've seen that what many people call coincidence can actually be something much more precise. A communication system that responds to your thoughts, emotions, and decisions. You've learned that your subconscious mind, your vibration, and your focus largely shape the way reality presents itself to you. These signs are not exclusive to special people. They are all around us all the time. The difference lies in who is attentive and who remains distracted. Ignoring synchronicities is easy. The world has trained you to do it. From an early age, you've been taught to rely only on logic and to despise everything that can't be proven in a laboratory. But the cost was high. You stopped trusting yourself and started relying exclusively on what came from outside. Only now you know. And knowing brings responsibility. You can continue to treat all this as in your head and carry on living life on automatic. Or you can recognize that there is a pattern forming, a pattern that repeats itself with time, context, and meaning, a pattern that cannot be explained by chance. The truth is that reality is responding to you every day. Every unlikely encounter, every phrase that appears at just the right moment, every number that insists on appearing has the potential to change the direction you're heading. But they only make sense when you stop and pay attention, when you act. And that's the key point. It's not enough to notice the signs, you have to respond to them. Most people even notice that something is out of the ordinary, but prefer to ignore it. They wait for more proof, for a rational explanation, for an impossible certainty. And the result is simple. The synchronicities stop. The connection weakens. Life returns to its previous pattern. On the other hand, those who trust the process and decide to act when a sign appears see results. They begin to notice more alignments, more doors opening, more of the right people at the right time. Because that's the effect. The more you respond, the more reality responds back. So now that you understand how all this works, the question is straightforward. Will you ignore it or will you move? That choice defines what comes next. You don't need more answers. You need action. Life is talking to you. It's waiting for your response. And perhaps the next step will only appear when you take the first one. Now it's up to you. If this content made sense, don't stop here. Leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss any content. Now watch this next video where I show you another essential step to change your reality.